Don't know, I'm Kevin. I am the co-director of Iggy Talks here. Each month we like to get together and like TED Talks, have just a group of people come out and listen to some very interesting stories. This month obviously has Valentine's Day in it, so this month's theme is love. We have Sammy and Thomas speaking on love, and we have Thomas Lynn right now.
Before I start, I have a quick question for all of y'all. How many people are going to be single this year for Valentine's Day? 2 days, raise them proud, Single Awareness Day. How many people have been single for Valentine's Day their entire life? Okay, looks like I'm not the only one. So I mean, like most of y'all probably know how it feels to kind of feel, lonely or sad, maybe happy, you never know. This will all make a little bit more sense once I get into my story. So, last semester I took a feminist philosophy class, and one of the things that we were talking about was, it doesn't really matter what we were talking about, but the basic idea was that I had to write a paper on a woman and how their life was and the choices that they made and everything else. So I decided, why not talk about my mom and, everything. So I called her up, talked to her, and I realized that this would be the perfect opportunity to ask about, how she and Dad met, because I never really knew the story. And I never really, thought about asking. So, I was, Mom, I just want to know the story. So, let's get into the mood. We're going to go all the way back, out of country, good 50, 60 years back now, geez. 1953 in Taiwan. This is my mother, Cui Fang. Isn't she adorable? Yeah. This was right after one of her dance performances. So this is our main heroine of the story, obviously. And this little dude right here is my dad, Yoping. This was about middle school or so. So anyway, let's get into the story. So my mom and dad actually knew each other since they were kids. Their dads were classmates, so they were really close. And they grew up together in the same city. And eventually, they just got to know each other. And eventually, once they got to college, or 1972, they started actually dating. And everything was fine for the time being, except for one small thing. My dad's family didn't really like my mom's family. My dad's parents specifically, because my mom lived on a farm with 4 or 5 kids total, and her parents, and they were poor. They were broke. My mom's dad, he had a business, but the business just it flopped. They went bankrupt. They lost all the money, and they were struggling by just get by. My dad, however, his grandfather was the richest in the entire town. So economical status is one thing led to another. Obviously, it makes sense that my dad's parents didn't really like my mom's family. And it was just kind of awkward. Anyway, 4 years go by. My dad serves in the military, mandatory drafting, serves as a military paratrooper, second lieutenant for 2 years. And after that, he goes off to medical school, actually, right next door at Tulane. He goes to Tulane for his master in public health and epidemiology. Next picture. Next picture. Back. Back. We're gonna pretend that didn't happen. Yeah, we're just gonna pretend that didn't happen because I think it's out of order. But anyway, so he goes and works. He goes for his master's, and after that, he works at LSU Medical Center, basically staying here, living here. While he lives here in New Orleans, his family tells him that my mom, is married off to someone else, and my mom's family, moves. Tries to start a new life, and my mom works at her father's law firm. Just after college, just working and helping the family out, this and that, living life and whatnot. Especially since there was no easy way of contacting them. This was 1978, 1979. There weren't really that many cell phones or internet out there. I know, shocking, but. And my mom was busy, my dad was busy, and eventually they just lost touch. Anyway, 1982. My dad moves back to Taiwan for a little bit. He flies back and forth. He has the money for the most part. And he meets another woman. So he and this other woman start talking. They start getting to know each other, and eventually they get engaged. However, my mother's sister, little conniving thing, she went and she looked for my dad. She found him, and she told him that my mom was still single, and that basically his parents lied to him to make sure that they wouldn't get married. The second my dad heard this, he was shocked, and he was upset. I mean, obviously, come on now. And he went to my mom, he went to like their family in tears, asking why didn't they, why didn't they give it a shot? Why didn't they believe in, our love? But this was the day right before the marriage. So he couldn't really just dump the other woman at the altar. Like, let's be real here. We're not gonna do that. So then the very next day he goes and gets married to this other woman. Which, when I asked my dad about this, he said was another lifetime. It was another story. It wasn't good. Like, his family and her family argued. I remember when I was a little kid, and my dad was like still dealing with a lawsuit against his in-laws because of like them like somehow neglecting the motel that we own and like having like burn damages or something. It was a mess. And eventually, in 1988, eventually my dad and the other woman divorced. So a few years later, 1991, Dad goes back to Taiwan again, and he finds out from my mom's cousin this time that my mom's still single. So he looks for her. At this point, my mom's family moves once again, so it was a lot harder to find her. But he eventually found her. And, he goes up to her and he's like, hey, I just want to, it's been a while, we haven't talked, I want to, just reconnect and just, catch up and stuff. My mom was a little hesitant. I mean, let's be real here. With, like, all that drama in the back, who would want to, like, start that up again and, like, possibly cause even more drama? But, my dad was like, no, like, I'm leaving tomorrow. I just want to talk. I just want to, like, get some coffee or whatever they did. I don't even know. But eventually my mom agreed, and, they talked. They caught up because, my dad lives in America, my mom lives in Taiwan. Once again, the whole long-distance thing doesn't really work at the time. So then the next day, my mom goes back to her life, working and living. And my dad goes back to the U.S., goes back to the airport. At this time, for those history buffs out there, Taiwan was in a transit from martial law to a more democratic system. But the government was still pretty authoritative. And my dad somehow got himself involved in some anti-government activity. I know, right? Like, I wouldn't have thought this at all. And because of this anti-government activity, like, he was found out as a part of the group, and he was blacklisted. So, like, they had a list of, like, all the people involved in this group, this, like, anti-government whatever. And basically, if they were to leave the country, they wouldn't be allowed back in. Yeah, so if he got on that plane to come back here, he and my mom would have just lost touch again. So, instead of doing that, he grabbed his luggage, went right back to her house, and asked for her hand in marriage. And, this time my mom's family was a little bit more accepting. They were a little bit more willing to give it a go. And traditionally, the husband brings the wife back to his house. But my grandparents were like, you don't have to bring her back to your parents' house. That's fine, you can move in with us. And he was like, oh, that's perfectly fine. That wasn't my plan to begin with. But, they get married. About a year later, give me a second. About a year later, the martial law finally gets dissolved and the government gets all sorted out. And that was also the time when they had a little baby. Funny, he kind of looks like me. Anyway, so they have a child, and my dad works, he comes back again, since he's allowed to come back and forth now with his name not being on a blacklist. And, he starts working on the immigration papers for my mother, my sister and me to come move here and live with him. So, I mean, talking to my parents, I asked my dad about the story, and he said, like, you know, he didn't have like a set goal in his life, and he was just kind of wandering around, which is why, like, the first marriage happened. And then I asked my mom about it. I asked her, like, you know, are you happy with the choices that you made? And she said yes, she's really happy. You know, she's happy because she feels like, you know, God let her, gave her good choices, gave her a good life, and, you know, things like that. Back to the very first thing that I asked about, let me get a hand again. How many people are going to be single? Just, you know, yeah? Okay, good. Sorry, that's just an ego boost to make sure I'm not the only one. But anyway, you know, my whole entire life, I've never had a relationship. I mean, like, I've barely had anybody, like, have a crush on me. And it's just, like, you know, it's a little bit down. It, you know, puts me in a bad mood sometimes, I'm not gonna lie. Because I see all my friends and I see strangers, they're all being lovey-dovey and, you know, holding hands and kissing and things like that. But, I mean, listening to this story, like, it just happens. That's the thing. It's like, things happen for a reason. And if it's meant to be, then it's gonna happen. Regardless of how many people you find, regardless of how far away people are. And this, like, doesn't just apply to love, although that's kind of the theme here. I mean, it just applies to everything. It's just like, if it's going to happen, it will happen for a reason. And yeah, like, it's just saying, it gives me hope because, like, you know, obviously they've gone through so much hardship. And I know, like, I feel like I've gone through a lot of hardship, but things will happen when it happens. And I mean, look at this. This was last year. This is my dad's mother, and like her and my mom are like they're pretty good. They're besties, you know. And just like you see this, you hear the story, and you're just like, I want this. It's going to happen. I keep telling myself that every day. It's going to happen. Thank you. Speaking of things that, you know, that's bound to happen. I was actually talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she was telling me the very first time that she's ever seen me, I was actually like playing a show. If you don't know, I'm a vocal performance major with the music industry.